Let's get into all of this with Jason Pack, who's host of the Disorder podcast, senior analyst at the NATO Foundation. Jason, good afternoon.
Afternoon to you.
Let's not dwell on him calling him daddy too much. But I will ask you about some other comments that Mark Rutte made today in just a moment. But obviously NATO's commitment for its members to raise defence and security spending to 5% it's the hot topic there, isn't it? And it was always going to be. Are we seeing this commitment because the threat and the urgency, I suppose, around the threat is so real, or is it purely because Donald Trump is in the White House?
It's both, as you can say. I mean, defense spendings have always been a target. The idea of 2% of GDP, which was set at the Wales summit a long time ago, was difficult to cajole people because there didn't seem a reason for it. Now everyone knows the reason. And in fact, it's Trump's threat to leave the Europeans on their own, that they would have to defend themselves, which is the best reason to up defense spending. So his sheer irrationality has gotten his allies to do his bidding.
Yeah, but if you're committing to NATO, if you're committing to that 5%, then you want to know that the United States will be there at a time of need as well, don't you? And then we had the Secretary General, as I was saying, of NATO, Mark Rutte. He said today that politicians in Europe and Canada should stop worrying about the US commitment to NATO's Article 5. That's the article that if one member is attacked, they know that everyone's got their back, essentially. Fair enough, but it's easy to see why people might not, and people might worry because Donald Trump, goes back and forth on it, it seems.
Of course, but Mark Rutte is very sophisticated, and he understands that it is in the U.S.'s interest to support NATO. And no matter how much trash talking Trump might do, I won't support Estonia if they don't pay up. When push comes to shove, Republican congresspeople will want Article 5 to work and for our NATO allies to be defended. So there is a logic here which goes beyond President Trump's irrational statements. NATO is the longest and most successful defense alliance in history, and long may it stay that way. I think that today is a great success, and whether we got there by hook or by crook, by Trump lies or bluster, almost doesn't matter. You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying. One way or another, if the commitment is there, then that shores up a degree of certainty over NATO, doesn't it? But I do wonder, just on those comments, it was around about this time yesterday, we were talking about the comments that Donald Trump had made on Air Force One when he was asked about the commitment, the United States commitment to NATO's Article 5 clause. And he said, depends on your definition. Which again isn't exactly a wholehearted response, is it? There are numerous definitions, he said, of Article 5. You know that, right, to a reporter, but I'm committed to being their friends. Well, you know NATO, you know Article 5 inside and out, I would have thought. I mean, are there numerous definitions of Article 5?
Like so many things, Trump is partially right. I'm someone who loathes him, and I moved to your glorious country to avoid living in his, but he is right here. Article 5 doesn't commit a given action when a NATO ally's sovereignty is impinged. It commits to mutual defense, but you could say that mutual defense is by saying, I support you. Or you could say it's by a nuclear retaliation, both of which could be seen as an Article 5 commitment. Keep in mind that the only time that Article 5 was ever used was by the European allies in defense of America after 9/11. But was America attacked by a sovereign after 9/11? And what did its Article 5 commitments mean to help ISAF in Afghanistan? Again, unclear. So he is onto something.
Yeah.
Just as he's onto something in saying that he has reestablished American deterrence by using bunker busters in Iran. So his irascibility may actually be working.
Yeah, so but if you were an Estonia or if you were a Finland, for example, then wouldn't you have legitimate concern about that ambiguity?
But NATO has always existed in that ambiguity. If we go back to the very
But not
beginning,
with this guy as president.
No, but there is a continuity here that may not be immediately clear to non-historians of this topic. At the start of NATO, the first NATO Secretary General was a British gentleman by the name of Lord Ismay. And he said that NATO exists to keep the Germans down and the Americans in. And the point is the Americans have never really wanted to commit their troops to defend Europe post-World War II. They've wanted the Europeans to do that. But NATO as an institution struggles to rope them in. And hence, that Trump now feels, I made a great success. I got them to commit to 5% of GDP. That ropes them in. And Reuter, appealing to Trump's ego, is doing what I would call order the disorder. What I talk about on my Disorder podcast is that there are so many forces pulling allies, even to have different policies, but you rope the allies in behind a collective mission statement. And I think NATO has done that. NATO is an idea more than it's a defense alliance.
But then the pressing concern and the reason mainly that we're talking about raising the GDP percentage of spending on defence, this funding is because of fears over Russia, mainly. You then have to look at how little Russia was actually mentioned at this summit, which is sort of, looking glass stuff, isn't it? Very little, again, mainly because of Donald Trump and his attitude towards Putin.
Correct. There's window dressing going on here. But what if we look at a new security model? You could say, as Dan Senior has said in his Call Me Back podcast, that a new model for America's relationships militarily has been established with the relationship with Israel and the recent war over Iran. That's that America empowers its allies to be hegemonic in their theater. So Israel is now the hegemonic security provider in the Middle East. Taiwan, China, Japan can be made hegemonic in their theater, and the European members of NATO are supposed to be the hegemonic European security presenters, but European providers of security. So they should get the nuclear deterrence. They should make the armed forces to do that.
Jason, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on. Jason Pack, who's host of the Disorder podcast and senior analyst at the NATO Foundation.